ask you to stay with me, not for me, I am nobody, but for you, for your souls. Give me the opportunity to tell you my story, and I assure you that in the end, the way you see your life, your decisions, and eternity could change forever. Before the Lord broke me to rebuild me, I was what the world calls a good man, and that, brothers and sisters, is one of the most dangerous lies whispered in humanity's ear. You are good. Good compared to whom? Good by what standard? I had my own standard, a very convenient one. My name is Samuel Ortega, and I am 54 years old. For more than 20 years, I was married to a wonderful woman, a servant of God whom I did not deserve, named Rebecca. We had 2 sons who are now good men, thanks to her and the mercy of the Lord, not to me. From the outside, I was the exemplary husband, the provider, the friendly neighbor who always said hello, the reliable co-worker at church because yes, I went to church. I was one of those who arrived on time, one of those who gave offerings, one of those who even participated in some activity now and then. I sat in the pew, listened to the sermon, and even felt a momentary emotion during some praise song. I believed that by doing so, my Sunday check-in bought me a kind of insurance against divine judgment. How wrong I was, how blind. My heart was thousands of miles away from the altar where my body sat, while my wife prayed for me, fasted for our marriage. I was living a double life in the most vile and calculated way. It all began subtly, as sin always does. Chapter 2, Testimony of Death. When my heart stopped. A gaze that lingered too long on a co-worker, a flirtatious comment disguised as a professional compliment, an innocent coffee meeting to discuss projects turned into an excuse to share intimate details that belonged only to my wife. The enemy is cunning. He doesn't confront you with the abyss all at once. He shows you a pleasant little path lined with poisonous flowers. He tells you, just one step, it's not so bad, everyone does it, you deserve it, you work so hard, you're not valued enough at home. And I, in my foolishness, in my pride, believed him. That first time I was unfaithful to Rebecca, I felt a sharp pang of remorse, a pain in my chest that almost suffocated me. I cried in the car on the way home. I felt like the most miserable person on earth. I asked God for forgiveness, a superficial apology, a fearful apology, not a genuine repentance. I promised I would never do it again. But the door was already open, and once you open a crack to the sin of adultery, it doesn't rest until it has demolished the entire edifice of your life. The second time was easier, the remorse less, the third almost non-existent. By the fourth, there was no guilt left, only careful logistics to avoid being discovered. The years passed like this. It wasn't just 1 or 2, there were several women over almost 15 years. Some were fleeting affairs of a few weeks, others stretched on for months. I became an expert at lying. I had a second phone, invented business trips, meetings that lasted late. The money that should have been for my household I spent on dinners, gifts, and hotels. I became a consummate actor. I would come home, kiss my wife, play with my children, and inside I was a whitewashed tomb, clean and tidy on the outside, but full of dead people's bones and all sorts of filth. That's how the Bible describes me, and that's how I was. My heart hardened like stone. Sermons about sin, about holiness, about hell, bounced off me. I thought, that's for murderers, for great sinners. Mine is a weakness, God understands. What arrogance. I justified my sin in the most twisted ways. I even convinced myself that Rebecca was to blame. She doesn't dress up like she used to. She's so focused on the children, she just doesn't understand me. I looked for any excuse to place the responsibility for my own sin on the shoulders of the woman to whom I had sworn love and fidelity before God's altar. I was the guilty one, I was the adulterer, but in my distorted mind, I was the victim. Friends, adultery is not just a physical act, it's a spiritual cancer. It rots your soul, makes you a liar, selfish, robs you of peace, fills you with constant fear of being discovered, and isolates you from true communion with God. Because how can you lift holy hands to God on Sunday when those same hands caressed a stranger's skin on Saturday? How can you say I love you to your wife, looking into her eyes full of trust when those same lips had kissed another mouth just hours before. It's self-imposed torture, a living hell that prepares you for eternal damnation. I thought I had everything under control, but the word of God is clear when it says, "Do not be deceived, God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows." Galatians 6-7, and my harvest, brothers and sisters, was about to arrive, not in the way I expected, not with my wife discovering my messages, or with a scorned love revealing the truth. No, God had a much more direct, much more impactful method to make me understand the gravity of my path. He was going to allow me to taste, just for an instant, the destiny my soul was choosing with each act of betrayal. I remember starting to feel unwell, chronic fatigue, chest pains that I attributed to the stress of my complicated life. The doctor told me my blood pressure was through the roof, that I needed to take care of myself. I ignored the warnings. I was too busy managing my double life to pay attention to the only life I truly had. Sin blinds you not only spiritually, but physically as well. It makes you feel invincible, immortal. But we are fragile. We are a vapor that appears for a short time and then vanishes, and my time seemed to be running out. I was about to face the most brutal reality, one that would take me from my bed of lies to a place where the only truth is eternal torment, and it would all begin with a sharp pain, a stifled scream, and sudden darkness. Darkness, that was the first thing, but it wasn't the darkness of a room without light, it was a weighty darkness, a pressing darkness. The pain in my chest was what started it all. I was in my own home, it was a Saturday afternoon, Rebecca was in the kitchen humming a hymn, and I was on the couch, supposedly reading the newspaper, but I was actually deleting incriminating messages from my second phone, planning the lie I would tell to escape that night. I felt a sharp pain, like a needle piercing my sternum. I ignored it, it was stress, I told myself. But then the sharp pain. Chapter 4, Testimony of Terror, at the Gates of Hell, turned into a claw that squeezed my heart with immense force. Air refused to enter my lungs. The newspaper slipped from my hands. I tried to call my wife, but only a muffled whimper came out of my mouth. I saw her running toward me, her face contorted with panic. Her screams sounded distant, as if they were on the other side of a tunnel, and then darkness swallowed me. I thought that was it, a quick end, a blackout, but I was so wrong. The physical pain ceased, but it was replaced by something infinitely worse, absolute awareness. Suddenly, I was outside of myself. I saw myself slumped in the armchair, my eyes glazed over and my skin turning grayish. I saw Rebecca, my faithful Rebecca, shaking me, crying my name, calling emergency services with a trembling hand, and I, the real me, my spirit, my essence, floated near the ceiling. I watched the scene with a coldness that terrified me. I felt neither love nor pity for her. All the feigned affection, all the emotions constructed to maintain my facade had vanished. All I felt was an icy dread and a stark awareness of my own wickedness. Every lie, every betrayal, every lustful thought I had harbored for years were no longer memories. They were part of me, like rotting organs within my spiritual being. And then I began to fall. It wasn't a soft fall, it was a violent tug, as if an invisible hook had sunk into my soul and I was being dragged down into the depths of the earth. The panic I felt for my dying body completely overwhelmed me. I screamed, but I had no voice. I tried to fight, but I had no limbs. I was pure consciousness, caught in a current of despair that pulled me down through an ever denser, more oppressive darkness. It was a cold unlike any earthly chill. It wasn't the absence of heat, it was an active presence of evil, a chill that froze the soul and made you feel eternally alone. The initial silence was broken by sounds, at first, confused whispers, then they grew clearer. They were wails, millions upon millions of voices weeping in endless agony. They weren't cries of physical pain, but of futile regret, of lost opportunities. I heard men lamenting dirty dealings, women weeping for having aborted their children, young people screaming for lives wasted on drugs and vices, and interwoven with it all, a sound that chilled me to the bone, the gnashing of teeth. It's not a metaphor, brothers, It's the real sound of the eternal frustration and rage of souls gnawing at themselves in a powerless fury against God, against themselves, against the inescapable justice of their own damnation. As I fell, my life didn't flash before my eyes like in the movies. It was worse. I was forced to relive every single one of my acts of adultery, but this time, from the perspective of Christ and those I had hurt. I felt the sharp, piercing pain in my wife's heart every time I was with another woman. I felt her loneliness in the empty bed, her silent tears on the pillow while I thought she was asleep. I felt the confusion in my children when my presence was only physical, but my heart and mind were elsewhere. Chapter 5, Testimony of Righteousness, the Valley of the Fornicators. And I felt the holiness of God being defiled. The marriage covenant I had made before his altar was not a mere social contract, it was a picture-sacred covenant between Christ and his church, and I had trampled it underfoot, mocked it, wallowed in the mud of my lust again and again. Every excuse I had concocted turned to dust. Rebecca ignored me now. It was just a physical thing. I needed to feel alive. All those lies were burned away by the holiness of truth. I saw my sin for what it truly was, not a weakness, but a high treason against the King of the universe, pure selfishness, idolatry of my own flesh, rebellion against a holy God who had only given me good. The shame I felt was a torment in itself, a shame so heavy, so crushing, that I wished I could cease to exist, but in that place, annihilation is a relief that never comes. Finally, the fall stopped. I landed not on solid ground, but on some kind of dry, rocky surface in an immense cavern that seemed to have no end. There was no visible fire like the kind we always imagined, at least not in that area. The only light was a sickly reddish glow emanating from the rocks themselves, as if they were perpetually on the verge of incandescence, casting dancing, terrifying shadows. The air was thick, fetid, smelling of sulfur, yes, but also of fear, of burnt flesh, and above all, of hopelessness. It was a smell that clung to your soul. I looked around, and my non-existent heart shrank. I saw shapes, silhouettes of people, of souls, millions of them. Some wandered aimlessly, moaning, their faces contorted with eternal anguish. Others huddled together, trembling, as if trying to hide from an all-encompassing presence. And then I realized something terrible. There was no love, no compassion, not a single shred of kindness. Each soul was completely isolated in its own misery, consumed by its own selfishness. Chapter 6, Testimony to the Weight of Sin, the Consequences of Disobedience. If one soul stumbled upon another, they didn't help each other, they cursed and hated each other. It was selfishness, the self first, that governs us on earth without Christ, taken to its ultimate and eternal expression. It was then that a voice, not an audible voice, but one that resonated within my own conscience, spoke to me. It wasn't the voice of God the Father, nor that of Jesus. It was an authoritative, cold voice, a spiritual being in charge of the justice of that place, and what it communicated to me, wordlessly, but with terrifying clarity, made me realize that my journey had only just begun. I wasn't in a generic hell. I had arrived at a section, a specific district of torment, prepared for a particular kind of sinner. I realized that hell isn't a one-size-fits-all punishment, it is terribly personal and just, and the voice let me know, with a certainty that shattered me, where I was headed. It pointed me down a path where the wails were different, sharper, more specific, and I knew, with a horror that words cannot describe, that I was about to see and experience the place reserved for people like me, the Adulteres Pavilion. The being that had spoken to me, that entity of cold justice, urged me to move. I couldn't resist. My spiritual feet, or whatever they were, began to walk along a path of sharp, black rock. On either side of the path, in the reddish gloom, I could make out unfathomable abysses from which rose the echo of millions of wails. The path spiraled downwards, and with each step the air grew hotter and heavier with the smell of burnt flesh and a kind of sweet, nauseating, rotten perfume. It was the smell of sinful pleasure transformed into eternal putrefaction. The wails I heard now were different. They were no longer the general laments of loss, but were filled with the specific anguish. I heard isolated phrases amidst the screams, It only happened once. He didn't love me, she seduced me, she was my soulmate. These were the same justifications I had repeated to myself 1,000 times on earth, but here, in this place of absolute truth, they sounded hollow, pathetic, and only served to fan the flames of their own tormented consciences. No one believed them, no one listened to them, only their own lies bouncing off the walls of their eternal prison. Finally, I reached a kind of immense plateau. What I saw there has marked my soul forever. Imagine a vast, dark desert under a starless sky, but instead of sand, the ground was covered with. Chapter 7, Reflection Testimony. What will you decide today? They appeared to be beds, thousands, perhaps millions of beds of all kinds, some luxurious, with silk canopies now rotten and stained, others were simple discarded mattresses, filthy and torn, and in every bed there was torment. I was forced to approach one of them. I saw a man, or what remained of his soul. He was naked, and his spiritual body seemed to be burning from within, but it was not an ordinary fire, it was a fire of unquenchable lust. Beside him, on the same bed, was an equally tormented female figure. They were like magnets, drawn to each other with an irresistible force. They drew near to embrace, to seek the pleasure that had condemned them, but the instant their skin touched, serpents of fire erupted from their bodies and bit each other with a venom that did not kill, only intensified the pain. They separated, screaming in agony, only to be drawn back again, second after second, to repeat the cycle. The act that had been his secret delight on earth was now his public and eternal torture. The desire was never satiated, it only transformed into pain, again and again and again. The most terrible thing was that she could perceive his thoughts, could sense the man's conscience. He didn't just suffer the pain of the fiery serpents. In his mind, he was forced to see, in an endless loop, the faces of his wife and children at the moment they discovered his betrayal. He saw their tears, their broken hearts, the destruction of his family, and that emotional pain was 1,000 times worse than the physical torment. Hell is not just a punishment imposed from the outside, it is the harvest of what you sow. This man had sown lust and deceit, and now he reaped pain and the inescapable truth of his sin. And the woman at his side, who had been his lover on earth, now felt no love for him, only a deep hatred. They blamed each other, cursed each other, spat at each other, trapped in an intimacy of eternal hatred. The illicit love they professed on earth was revealed for what it truly was, pure selfishness that now devoured them both. I was drawn into another scene. I saw a woman dressed in the tattered remnants of an elegant evening gown. She was alone on her bed of torment. Her punishment was different. Mirrors constantly appeared before her, but these mirrors did not reflect her image. They reflected all the men she had been with, the wives she had helped betray, the children whose homes she had helped destroy, and from the mirrors came voices, not demons' voices, but the real voices of those people, filled with pain and accusation. You destroyed my family. Because of you, my children grew up without a father. You promised me love and only left me empty. And with each accusation, disgusting, fat, white worms sprouted from her skin, slowly devouring her. They were. Chapter 8, Testimony of the Truth. The sin that blinds, the worms of guilt and shame, born of her own sin. She screamed and tried to tear them out, but for every one she removed, 2 more appeared. It was the image of Proverbs made real, for the lips of an adulterous woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil, but in the end she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a 2-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lead straight to Sheol. Proverbs 5-3-5. She had sought the sweetness of forbidden pleasure and was now consumed by wormwood and worms for all eternity. I felt an icy hand on my shoulder. It was that entity, the guide of my torment. It forced me to look in another direction. There, the punishment was utter solitude. I saw men and women who in life had been serial adulterers, who went from one couple to another, always seeking a new thrill. Now they were chained in the middle of their beds rotting, utterly alone, but it wasn't a peaceful solitude. They were tormented by an unbearable longing, a desperate need for contact, for affection, for the emotion that had ruled them in life. Around them, just a few feet away, walked beautiful and seductive figures. mirages of what they so desperately craved. They whispered promises, offered the relief they sought, and the chained souls struggled, screamed, tugged at their chains with all their might, trying to grasp that false promise, but the chains, forged from their own broken marriage vows, never yielded. Their torment was eternal desire and eternal frustration, to yearn forever for what they could never have, just inches away. It was the torment of Tantalus, but magnified to an infernal scale. A cold horror coursed through me. This wasn't a figment of a preacher's imagination, this was real, it was perfect and terrible justice. Each torment was tailored to the sin. The punishment wasn't arbitrary, it was the natural and eternal consequence of the choices made on earth. The bed, which should have been a bed of love, intimacy, and holy covenant, became the altar of torment. Pleasure, which had been their God on earth, became the instrument of their eternal pain. The darkness they used to hide their sin was now the inescapable atmosphere of their existence, and I was one of them. My name was on the list in this place. My sins were no different. Such a bed awaited me. Panic gripped me with a force I had never known. This wasn't a vision, not a horror movie I could wake up from. It was my destiny. The entity guiding me seemed to sense my terror and compelled me to keep walking. We passed countless scenes of agony, each a variation on the same theme, the broken covenant and lust transformed into pain. I saw a man who had used his power and money to seduce women. His torment consisted of being submerged up to his neck in a river of red-hot gold coins. Each coin that touched his skin burned him with the image of one of his conquests and with the memory of the price he paid for her, not just in money, but in integrity, in honor, in his very soul. He tried to climb out of the river, but the hands of the souls of the women he had used dragged him back down, blaming him for his own damnation. I saw a woman who had prided herself on stealing husbands. She said it was a game, a competition. Now. Chapter 9, Warning Testimony. The seeds of late regret was tied to a kind of carousel that spun endlessly, and on each turn she was forced to look out of a window. In one she saw the happiness of the family she had destroyed before her arrival, in the next she saw the bitterness and divorce she had caused, in the next, the sadness of the children, and in the last one, she saw herself, alone and abandoned by the man for whom she had sacrificed everything, just as had happened to her on earth before she died. The carousel spun faster and faster, and her cries of anguish mingled with the hollow, demonic laughter that seemed to power the machine. Her game had become her endless torture. My guide stopped in front of an empty bed. It was covered with sheets that looked made of ash. They smelled of betrayal. The entity pointed to the bed, and the realization struck me like lightning. It was for me. That was my bed. My place of torment was prepared. At that moment, a knowledge was given to me. I knew what my punishment would be. I would be forced to lie on that bed of ash, and beside me would not appear one of my lovers, but a figure that would constantly shift, taking the form of each of the women I had been with, and upon touching them, I would feel no pleasure, but would absorb into my own soul all the pain my sin had caused. I would feel the pang of guilt of the woman who was also married. I would feel the emptiness of the single woman who had hoped for love and received only lust. I would feel the confusion and damage in their very souls. But that wasn't all. On the other side of the bed would be my wife, Rebecca, not her real soul, thank God, but a perfect replica, and I would be forced to watch her cry, to watch her heart shatter into a million pieces over and over again for all eternity, and her weeping would be like acid on my spiritual skin. I couldn't comfort her, I couldn't ask for her forgiveness, I could only observe the fruit of my betrayal, and above the bed, suspended in the air, would be my phone, the second phone I used to cheat, and from it would come, in a constant, tormenting whisper, all the lies I told her, all the fake I love yous, all the excuses for my getaways. I have a late meeting, it's a business trip. Don't worry, my love. Each lie, a burning ember on my conscience. This was hell made to measure. They weren't contending demons, it was my own sin turned into my eternal executioner. It was the perfect justice of a holy God. I screamed with a terror and despair I didn't know a human being could contain. I screamed not from the physical pain that was to come, but from the justice of it all. It was just, that it was the most terrible thing, Deep down, I knew I deserved it. There was no excuse, no defense. I was guilty, and this was my punishment. I fell to my knees on the black rock, waiting to be dragged to my bed of torment. I closed my spiritual eyes, waiting for the first touch of the ashes, the first echo of my wife's cries. Time stood still. Every second was an eternity of anticipation of the horror. No, please, Jesus. I screamed without knowing why. On earth, his name had been just another word in my religious vocabulary. I used it without thinking, but here, in the heart of despair, on the threshold of my own damnation, that name came from the very depths of my being. It wasn't a prayer, it was the stifled cry of a man sinking for the last time. Jesus, have mercy. In hell, the name of Jesus brings no comfort to the damned. To them, it is the name of the judge who justly sentenced them. It is a reminder of the love they scorned, of the salvation they rejected. I heard other souls around me hiss and curse at the sound of that name, but my cry was different. It wasn't a complaint, it was a surrender. And then, in the midst of that oppressive darkness, that reddish glow, and that stench of death, something happened. A light. It wasn't like sunlight or a light bulb, it was a living light. It began as a tiny point, an immeasurable distance away, but it shone with a purity and intensity that made the sickly glow of hell seem like a shadow. Instantly, all the tormented souls around me reacted, shrank back, screamed, but this time with a different kind of dread, a reverential terror. They covered their faces, crawled to hide in the crevices of the rocks. The light was a torment 1,000 times worse for them than flames or worms, because it was a light of such absolute holiness that their own impurity felt like an unbearable burn. It was like pouring holy water on a demon. The presence of pure holiness is the worst torment for unrepentant sin, but in me, the light did not cause that kind of pain. I did feel my own uncleanness in a way that not even the awareness of hell had revealed to me. I saw myself as a worm, as a piece of rot before the magnificence of that holiness. Chapter 11, Testimony of Hope, a New Opportunity for You. The shame was overwhelming, but beneath it, for the first time since I died, I felt something else. It wasn't hope yet, it wasn't awe. The light was coming, or I was being drawn toward it. It grew in size and intensity, but it didn't blind me. On the contrary, it allowed me to see more clearly. I saw the ugliness of hell, the justice of the punishments, and my own guilt with a sharpness that hurt, and at the center of that all-consuming sphere of light, I began to make out a shape, a human silhouette, a man. I couldn't see his face clearly, it was veiled by the intensity of the glory, like trying to look directly at the sun, but I knew who he was. Every atom of my spiritual being knew, it was him, it was the name I had cried out, it was Jesus. He wasn't coming as the meek and humble lamb. He was coming as the King of glory, the judge of all the earth. His robe was whiter than anything imaginable, and from his feet seemed to emanate the same light that enveloped everything. He wasn't walking on the floor of hell. The floor of hell was fleeing from him. Wherever he went, the darkness receded. He stopped some distance from me. The being that had been guiding me, that cold, judgmental entity, simply vanished in his presence. It couldn't exist before him. All of hell was silent. The screams, the wailing, the gnashing of teeth all ceased. Only the king's commanding, absolute presence existed. I lay prostrate, unable to move, awaiting my final judgment, awaiting the word that would send me to my bed of torment forever. I knew that whatever he said would be just. Then he spoke. His voice wasn't as we imagine it. It wasn't soft and whispering like in religious images. It was like the roar of many waters, like the sound of thunder that shakes the universe, but at the same time, it was incredibly personal. Each word pierced to the very core of my being. Samuel Ortega said my name, and upon hearing it from his lips, I felt the weight of every second of my existence. I am the one who searches the mind and heart and gives to each according to their deeds. I know your life, I know your heart, I know your sin. His voice was not accusatory, it was declarative, it was the voice of truth itself. There was nothing I could say, I could only weep, not with physical tears, but with a sob from the soul, a total breaking. Your place is here, he continued, and his gaze seemed to point to the bed of ashes that awaited me. This is the wages of your choice. On earth, I gave you my word, which is a lamp to your feet. You ignored it. I gave you a godly wife to be your suitable helper and the image of my covenant. You betrayed her. I gave you a conscience to warn you of good and evil. You seared it. I gave you opportunities to repent, small touches of my spirit, moments of conviction. You hardened them. You chose the momentary pleasure of the flesh over the sanctity of my covenant and the eternity of your soul. This place is not my desire, but it is my justice. It is the harvest of your sowing. Each word was a sword cleaving me in two. It was the truth. It was the whole truth. There was not a trace of injustice in it. I nodded with my entire being, accepting my fate. But, he said, and that single word changed the atmosphere of eternity, in your last moment you cried out my name, not with merit, not with justice, but with the desperation of a lost soul, and my Father, in his sovereign mercy, has heard that cry. I couldn't understand. Mercy, here, for me, it was impossible. It made no sense. I am not saving you because of who you are, Samuel, said the voice that was like thunder. There is nothing in you that deserves to be saved. You are tainted, corrupt, and this is your just destiny. I am giving you a chance, not because of your merits, but because of mine, because of my blood that was shed also for sinners like you, because of the covenant I made on the cross. The light intensified, and for a second I could see through his robe. I saw his body, and it was marked. I saw the scars on his hands, on his feet, and I saw a wound in his side, and suddenly I understood. The pact I had broken with my wife was only a shadow. The real pact I had broken was with him. My adultery wasn't just against Rebecca, it was against him, the one who had bought me with his own blood. My body wasn't mine to use as he pleased, it was meant to be a temple for his spirit, and I had turned it into a den of thieves. I will show you what you should have chosen, he said. I will show you what you reject when you choose sin. He extended one of his marked hands toward me, and the instant I felt the slightest touch of his power, hell vanished. The transition was instantaneous and overwhelming. One moment I was in the oppressive, crimson darkness of hell, and the next I was in a place of indescribable beauty and peace. I was taken from the king's presence as judge and now I was at his side as observer. We were in what seemed to be a heavenly garden, but the words garden or heaven fall short. The air vibrated with a melody that was more than sound. It was a feeling of pure love and adoration that enveloped and healed you. The light didn't come from a sun, but emanated from everything, from the grass that seemed made of living emeralds, from the flowers, whose colors didn't exist on the earthly palette and which released fragrances that were pure joy, and above all, it emanated from the presence of the Lord Jesus, who now walked beside me. I looked toward him, and although I still couldn't see his face in all its splendor, his glory was now gentler, more welcoming. The feeling of being an unclean worm persisted, but it was now covered by an overwhelming sense of grace. This is the kingdom I have prepared for those who love me, said his voice, which sounded like that of a loving father speaking to his lost child. This is the home I have offered you. Before us appeared a scene. I saw a man and a woman, their glorified bodies shone with a soft light. They were sitting beside a river of crystal clear water, the river of life. They gazed at each other with a love so pure, so profound, that it made the greatest earthly love seem a pale shadow. There was no lust in their eyes, only complete knowledge and acceptance, a unity of spirit that was beautiful to behold. I could tell that they had been husband and wife on earth. On earth, the Lord explained, marriage was created to be a reflection of my love for my church, a covenant of faithfulness, sacrifice, and mutual commitment. Those who honor that covenant on earth, who strive for purity, who forgive one another, who persevere in love despite trials, learn a small part of my nature. Their reward is not merely avoiding hell, but entering into a relationship with me and with each other at a level of intimacy and joy that the human mind cannot conceive. I saw the couple rise and walk hand in hand, not into a bedroom, but toward a magnificent throne in the distance, the throne of the Father. They joined a chorus of millions of saints, all singing a song of praise to the Lamb who was slain. Their joy was complete. There was no jealousy, no possessiveness, no insecurity. The love that bound them together on earth had been perfected and expanded to include the entire family of God in perfect communion. The pleasure you sought on earth, Sam,